All right, let's bring in Jenny Blackbird. She's an Outreach Communications and Programming Coordinator at the Indigenous Studies Centre at the University of Toronto and is joining us from the city. Jenny Blackbird, thank you very much for being with us here on TRT World. Now, just lay out for us the importance of a day like today which centres Indigenous communities.
Well, acknowledgement is important, but I think one day is not enough. It might be a good start, but we always need to recognize Indigenous presence, Indigenous people, and our cultures and our languages and our traditions.
I mean, of course, as we mentioned in the piece, and you will well know, Canada is going through a reckoning and education of its past mistreatment of Indigenous communities. I mean, what effect of what we're learning about what happened in the past is having on communities today, do you think?
Well, the thing is that the atrocities and the violence and racism is ongoing, and it's been happening since European contact and since people started mistreating Indigenous people. So it's looking at the history, it's looking at current events, and then trying to figure out what will work best in the future, because Indigenous people are still facing violence, and today is the 5th anniversary, I believe, of the death of late Colton Boushie, who was killed by a white farmer. And there's still been no justice, and it was actually the family that were really scrutinized and put under the microscope when they're not looking at the problem of how relations between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in Canada may not be the best. So I think we really need to unlearn a lot of racism, and we need to actually listen to each other and listen to more Indigenous voices. And by all means, I'm not the only Indigenous person to listen to, so I'm always encouraging people to listen to other Indigenous people and hear their voices.
Absolutely, but your voice is powerful and it's one that should be heard. And I am interested in how you kind of get to that point where there is listening done, because as the Prime Minister of Canada has said, of course, it's not his generation's problem. They didn't do a lot of the things that happened in the past. And it's that problem, isn't it? How you sort of get past all this pain and come to some sort of understanding.
Well, I think taking responsibility is important. Trudeau's late father was actually, he wanted to push forward the white paper, which would strip Indigenous people of their rights. And he also famously quoted that if an Indigenous person doesn't speak their language and practice their culture, they're no longer Indigenous. So that it's very close to him, and people have to take responsibility. And my mother's family is from another country, and I have to also be an ally. So we have to face our own biases, our own preconceived notions of what we were taught in school. So curriculums need to be overhauled. Indigenous academics and community members and elders, knowledge keepers really need to be consulted on what is being taught. The history of Canada was not taught from an Indigenous lens. So going forward, we really need to involve all of our community members, on reserve, off reserve, status, non-status, because there's a whole thing called the Indian Act. So if no one has ever heard of the Indian Act, Google it. It's pretty scary. And their whole intention was to remove the Indian from the land. And residential schools, the residual effects are still felt today by the survivors and their intergenerational survivors. My late father was a residential school and a day school attendee. He passed away when I was young, and I don't know his story, but I know the effects of what his siblings went through are still affecting my generation. So we really need to unlearn, and we need to listen to Indigenous voices.
Absolutely right. Okay, Jenny Blackbird, keep raising your voice, and I do hope that there can be some kind of resolution to all of this. I appreciate your time, Jenny. Thanks for being with us.